Welcome to Cinema on a Shelf, a podcast about movies and physical media. My name is Matt, and thank you for spending some time with me instead of watching a movie. I promise I will try to make it worth your time. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2026 if you're listening to this near around when it comes out. Hope you all had a wonderful holiday season. Had some time to relax if you're able to. Probably watch a bunch of movies, whether they're holiday movies or going to the theater, which I was actually able to do with my wife a couple of times, which is a great way to kick off 2026. And maybe you got some great movies on physical media for Christmas or the holidays, whatever you celebrate. And if you did, maybe you got a chance to enjoy those. So hope your year has gotten off to a good start. And with today's episode, I thought it might be kind of interesting to talk about something that is something I know a lot of people do at the beginning of a year, sort of in the same vein of, the New Year's resolutions or, setting goals for yourself for a new year like a lot of people do. I thought it might be kind of fun to talk about the topic of collecting goals and, specifically what it means to sort of set goals for your collection that a lot of people might be doing in a new year. And then give a little bit of insight to some of my own collecting goals that I'm setting for myself for 2026. This is something that I, for a really long time in collecting movies, haven't really done. And I think last year was maybe the first year that I started to think about this a little bit more of, what I want out of the year as far as what I'm going to be collecting and trying to be a little more intentional about some of the things that I was collecting. And, rather than just kind of going online or to a physical media store and sort of just taking in what they had and going from there, it was something that I thought might be kind of interesting to do to have a little bit more focus on things, and was able to actually kind of create some new parts of my collection, get into some new things, and beef up some areas of my collection. So I did want to have this be something that I maybe do or at least rethink around this time of year, just saying, okay, what do I want out of the year for collecting? Do I want to continue with something that I've done? And I thought it might be kind of interesting to talk about, because it is something that I think can give any collecting hobby some interesting meaning. I've seen a few, collector channels on YouTube, and not always necessarily in the movie areas, even with other physical media, whether it's vinyl records, whether it's video games in particular. Actually, I've watched quite a few YouTube series on specific to video games and a lot of retro video games, where they set, the people that do this series of videos set a bit of a goal for themselves to either collect something in a specific way. There's a few people that have done, challenges where they're trying to, turn $20 into a full, retro video game collection, and finding cheaper games and selling them on eBay and using the profits to buy things they want to put in a collection. There's a lot of kind of really interesting ways to go about it, and I think having something like that as a goal or sort of a masthead for collecting can make it really interesting for a lot of people. But I do think it's a good way to create some kind of guiding purposes for your own collection. So I want to start sort of with why exactly you would want to potentially think about and set goals for collecting physical media. And I know the reason specifically for me that I started to think a little bit more about this in the last year or two was specifically about the idea of wanting to curate my collection a little bit more. I guess this was maybe a couple of years ago when I realized that I did have a lot of movies on DVD that I really love, but would love to have certain ones on more of an enhanced format. And when I did get a 4K player, then my interest in that sort of, peaked up a little bit. So the idea behind, setting some of these goals does allow you to start to think about curating your collection, rather than maybe just amassing everything you can possibly find, which for me wasn't the way that I wanted to collect at that point in time. I wanted to be, really, really focused and intentional on what movies I was adding to the collection. So setting these goals allowed for me to keep that kind of a focus through the year. It did also, like I said, give me a little bit of purpose and direction and intentionality with what I was doing. So it wasn't just, okay, well, I'm just going to go buy whatever movie I can find, or maybe I'll go, searching specifically to a new store and kind of going with whatever's there. It did give me the opportunity to, look at where I was shopping, where I was spending my dollars for physical media, and say, hey, maybe I'll check out this, online retailer that I hadn't really checked out, but they had a specific thing that I was looking for, or maybe had a good selection of a label that I was interested in. So it again did give me a little bit of thought into that aspect of kind of giving some direction as to what I was doing. Setting collecting goals like this does also allow you to sort of, identify areas of focus that you want to improve in your own collection. Beef up is kind of the, word that a lot of people will use to say, yeah, I don't have a lot of, this type of movie, and I want to have more action movies in my collection. That if you kind of have that as a goal, you can focus in saying, okay, what are some of these great action movies that I want in the collection? So it kind of gives you a chance to look at your own collection, evaluate what you have, what you like, maybe what you're lacking a little bit, and then give a little bit of focus on that to say, okay, and, I want to focus on this genre, or this label, or, something very specific about that. It does also, give you an opportunity to do something that I think sometimes with collecting in any way can, spiral in one way. And I've talked about before about, the budget and how much money you decide to spend on your habits for collecting. And does give a chance to sort of set a goal and understand, how you want to spend your money. And this can be a lot of different ways. There's not really good and bad ways to focus this in on. But, if you did want to, say, start a collection from scratch and you were wanting to buy lots of movies all at once, then you can say, okay, well, I have a certain amount of money and I want to stretch it as far as I possibly can. Or maybe you are really interested in bargain hunting or going to the thrift stores or garage sales or things like that. You want to stretch your dollar as far as it will go. Maybe you want to, take the money that you've earmarked for your collection and say, well, I really want to focus on like specialty, like limited sets, limited editions, box sets, maybe, steel books or other things that you're sort of more interested in with your collection. And rather than getting more movies, you want to get something that is a little bit more elevated in price, but would be really special to you, or be something that you wanted to have as part of your collection, as opposed to, the volume that would go with it. You may also want to, think about labels, boutique labels, things like that, saying, hey, I really want to get into something new, or I would like to get more movies from a specific label, and kind of go from there and say, well, yeah, I would like to maybe focus my money more on that. And whether it's doing that throughout the year, whether it's identifying, sales, if you're looking at, say, the Barnes and Noble sale for Criterion or Arrow Video or Kino Lorber sales throughout the year, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. And again, it just, again, gives you an opportunity to try and be as intentional as you possibly can with your own collection, because it does cost money. And, I think it's really important for any collector to know how much money they want to spend from their sort of, disposable income about their collection. And maybe it's spending less. Maybe you are spending more. Maybe you have a new job and you'd like to, to sort of beef up your collection as part of having a little bit more disposable income. That's completely fine. I just think it's a really good byproduct of having a goal to be able to focus on that. Because if you say you want to start collecting out of print Blu-rays, that can be really expensive really quickly. So you do, I think having a goal like that gives you a chance to sort of evaluate and say, okay, I know this is going to be something that I would spend a little bit more money on, and that's okay. That's what I want to focus on for that point. Now, all of these goals don't necessarily have to go with any specific year. In fact, I think a lot of collecting goals or things you would focus on are probably year agnostic, if you will. And there's certainly goals that you can have that will probably continue on from year to year, that maybe if it's a new goal you start this year, it may not be realistic to fully achieve that goal within a year. Maybe it is, but this is something that you can continue to think about, continue to focus on, and maybe part of your goal is just continuing a previous goal that you have. I don't necessarily think a calendar year matters quite as much in most aspects of these things. So, I think there's a lot of advantages to having goals like this and direction. It is sort of fun to go, collecting and hunting for movies, if you will, and say like, yeah, I'm really looking for, Kino Lorber titles or something really specific to say like, yeah, this is really what I'm kind of on the hunt for. Because what I've found from personal experience is when you do something like this and put a focus on it, it's kind of amazing what you'll be able to find. And you may say, oh, well, yeah, I didn't really think to, look at this online retailer for a specific type of release. Or, maybe you'll do a little bit more searching rather than just finding the first thing that's there and going with it. It does give you a little bit of motivation to dig a little bit deeper. And if you're into the hobby of collecting, you may want to be the type of person that digs really deep into it. You may not as well, and that's also completely fine with however you want to do it. If you're scratching the surface, hey, go nuts, give yourself some freedom. And I think even setting a goal can be just that. If you want to say, hey, I want to discover a bunch of new stuff, that's a really cool way to set a goal as well. So that then begs a bit of the question as what type of collecting goals can you set for yourself? And I don't mean this to be an exhaustive list by any means, but I did come up with a few ideas of things that you could think about and maybe set within some parameters for your own collecting goals. And some of these are at the end of the episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my own collecting goals. And some of these are really guiding principles for some of that. One that doesn't necessarily apply to me, as I have been collecting for a number of years now, is if you are starting from scratch, if you are brand new to getting into physical media, or maybe you are getting back into physical media. I've seen quite a few people online on Reddit saying, I want to get back into physical media. They maybe downsized their movies at one point in time in their life and want to get back into it now. If you are starting from scratch, you kind of get a chance to have a lot of freedom and decide, how do you want to do this? And this can be just to say, hey, I want to, get myself a player and get 20 movies. Or, if you don't want to set a specific volume, say I want to build, a collection for cheap. Or I really like this specific style of movie or type of movie or genre of movie, and I want to start my collection by building up my favorites in that genre. Or maybe just your favorite movies of all time. There's a lot of history of physical media where so much stuff is available and for the most part still in print a lot of the time. So this could be, like I said, starting from owning nothing, finding a new player. Maybe you have a gaming console that has a disc drive, or you're buying a new DVD, Blu-ray, 4K player and kind of upgrading a little bit, maybe even saying, oh, I have, 100 DVDs at home and I now have a Blu-ray player, I now have a 4K player. So maybe that your version of quote unquote starting from scratch is getting into a new format. I know I did this personally when I first got a 4K player, started to look at my collection and say, what do I really want to own on 4K that I already have? And also, was collecting some new stuff as well. But the idea of getting into a new format can do that. This can also apply to a format that is maybe an older format, I guess. If you made a collecting choice to say, I want to get into laser discs, and you found a laser disc player and you wanted to go back to some of the older technologies with that. I know there's a lot of people that are really interested in collecting some older technologies. So laser disc, VHS. I mean, if you really want to go crazy, Betamax. There are a lot of people, and there's collectors markets for all of those and even more different older formats. So I do think that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a new format as far as the latest and greatest technology. If you've decided you wanted to get into VHS collecting, there is a huge market for VHS collecting. There's also a lot of VHS available. As I mentioned, VHS, as a as a format was the top of the mountain for a very long time with home video, and there's a lot of people that are really interested in it specifically, and whether it's about certain genres or just collecting cool stuff. Lots of kids shows on VHS. There's all sorts of things to do with that. So starting from scratch doesn't necessarily mean that you have absolutely nothing, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're upgrading to the latest and greatest technology. Could also be a little bit backwards facing as well. If you do have a newer format that you want to collect for, you do collect for, or you're continuing into the future, one thing you can potentially focus on is upgrades and new restorations of films that go onto newer formats like Blu-ray and 4K. There are, year after year, a lot of the major studios now are starting to really go through their back catalogs and taking some of the really popular titles and upgrading them from a DVD to a Blu-ray or to a 4K, somewhere along that line. And, I know specifically there are some this year that are coming out early in the year. I think Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights is getting a 4K, or it has gotten a 4K very recently. And from what I look at online, that's probably not the last Paul Thomas Anderson film that is going to get a 4K upgrade this year. So there's a lot of people that will be, really interested in some of their favorite older films. I know I went through this when I first got my 4K player with a lot of Stanley Kubrick films. I am a huge Stanley Kubrick fan, and I now own a good amount of his films on 4K as Warner Brothers was upgrading them, and now Criterion doing some 4K upgrades as well with the recent Eyes Wide Shut 4K, Barry Lyndon getting a 4K. I wouldn't be surprised if we see even more 4K upgrades from, his films and a lot of other films in every studio's different back catalog. So if you're someone that maybe has a bunch of DVDs and you have upgraded a player, or you just want to, slowly get some of your favorite films on the highest possible format, or there's maybe brand new restorations. Every year there are so many new upgraded 4K restorations or better of classic films, of foreign films, of hard to find films, never before released or previously out of print films. Could be high end, could be, low end films, could be B, D, F movie as opposed to, some of the higher ones. There's all sorts of upgrading and restorations that are done every year. And if you're really interested in having some of these films in the highest possible quality, then that's one thing that you can set a goal to focus on for yourself. Another way that you can focus a collecting goal is to look specifically at a director or an actor, or maybe something very specific about a person that's involved with a certain movie. I just mentioned about, upgrading Stanley Kubrick films that I had previously. This is an example of, not only just upgrading to a new restoration, but upgrading for a specific director. And this is really fun. This is one where you can really personalize a collecting goal, because if you are, let's say, a huge fan of someone like Meryl Streep, if you decide to focus your collecting and get as many Meryl Streep films as you can, this really opens up kind of a whole new avenue that doesn't involve looking for specific studios, specific labels. If you just want to amass a collection of Meryl Streep films, you can do that so many different ways. It can be different formats, it can be, different labels, all sorts of things like that. And I know this is a popular one that you see and hear a lot of people do. I know specifically I most definitely have done this. I have a continuing goal in doing this, and this is really fun, because this is one that can be very particular to you, and you're not just necessarily going after, let's say, a label that curates their own stuff, and you go along with that, whether it's a genre you like or not, or something you've even heard of, which again can be really fun. This is one where you can say, hey, I really love Meryl Streep, or I really love Cary Grant, or I really love Jack Black or Steve Martin or whoever. There's a lot of different ways to focus on someone and have that be a really fun goal, because you never know where you might run across a movie with a certain actor or by a certain director. You can also do something that I've talked about in previous episodes about sale season, the one I did just before Christmas. And it's, you can also have a goal of prioritizing sales, or potentially prioritizing lower budget buys. So maybe you have a goal this year to buy most of your movies at the thrift store, or for $5 or less. You may also decide that, well, I'm gonna focus a little more on new movies, but have them be bought during sales. Again, wanting to stretch your dollar as far as you can. And I completely understand that. I mean, I know there's whole areas of people that do nothing but garage sailing and thrift store shopping, and I get the thrill of that. Absolutely. So if you wanted to prioritize that specifically in stretching your dollar, then there's a lot of different ways that you can research different sales that are going on. I know in my sale season episode, I talked about the, on Reddit, there's a wonderful list of different sales that go on for boutique labels and different stores and whatnot. So if you keep that kind of in mind throughout the year, that can be a really fun goal as well, because you can find some really good deals out there. In sort of the same vein of collecting for a specific director or actor, you can also broaden that focus a little bit and concentrate on a specific genre, or maybe even a specific era of films. So I have seen, for example, someone like DJ from Films by Color on YouTube has mentioned that he, got really interested in the last couple of years of collecting films in the Criterion Collection from the 1920s, because he, I think, hadn't seen a lot of films from that era, I believe is how that went, and decided he wanted to, see more, beef up his collection a little bit in that area. So focus on sort of an era within a subgenre within a subgenre, I guess. Or, if you said that, okay, well, I really, enjoy low budget horror films, and I would like to discover more, or I would like to find more of my favorite low-budget horror films, then keeping within that genre can be a really fun way to collect. Again, because you kind of never know what you might find out there if you narrow your lens to something within that kind of a genre. Setting goals for collecting also doesn't have to be super specific. It doesn't have to drill down into something, like a genre or a category within a genre, like I just mentioned. You can also keep it very general. So if you wanted to say in a year that I want to collect my personal favorite films, then that's a great way to kind of keep it very general, not have to, narrow your focus too much. But then, think about, okay, what are my personal favorite films? Maybe you have a list on Letterboxd, or maybe you sit down and make a list on your phone to say, hey, here's the here's my 30 favorite films of all time. How many of these do I own? And, say, well, by the end of the year, I'd like to own most of these, or I'd like to maybe, knock half of these off my list. You can keep it, again, very general and personalized to you without having to, narrow your scope too much. You can also do the same type of thing with keeping a broad general idea of saying, instead of personal favorites, I want to focus on new discoveries, blind buys, maybe films that I haven't seen before, or ones that you've been meaning to check out, or any kind of new discovery to you. This is a really fun way to set a goal that also gives you a lot of freedom and allows you to not necessarily just go searching for one specific thing, but be open to whatever you can find. So I've mentioned a lot about the collecting goals and keeping a focus on it. It can also be really fun to keep that focus really, really open, because you might discover something that you might not have otherwise, and maybe you find a new favorite film of all time. I know I've done this in the past, where take a chance on a film that maybe you've heard about or read about or know nothing about, but has really cool artwork, or it's in a genre that you love, or maybe has an actor that you love but have never seen it, and you pick it up and watch it, and it's a new favorite of yours. So this is a fun way to still set a goal, but also kind of allow for those personal discoveries to happen as well. One type of goal that I know can be really, really fun for a lot of collectors, myself included here, is to take the idea of, a specific boutique physical media label, or even just a large scale physical media label, and focus and prioritize on getting stuff from that label. So, we've talked about obviously a lot of different labels on this podcast. We're going to continue to talk about more because it's something that I'm really interested in. And, you can kind of take a focus and say, all right, this year I'm going to beef up my Criterion collection. Maybe you dipped your toes in and said, yeah, I really want to go full hog on it. Or maybe there's something new that you have never checked out that you want to discover, or maybe something you have a little bit of and say, oh yeah, I really, really love this, so I want to check out more from this specific label. So there's a lot of different things to think about when you're, putting a focus and goal on collecting a specific label in a year or further than that, and say things like, what do you want from collecting this label? Do you like, let's say things like slip covers? Do you enjoy the artwork that's on a slip cover? Do you love, a certain label's limited editions, whether it's the extras that are there or the bigger boxes, or, having an extra booklet, or other things maybe that go with something like collector's sets and limited editions? Do you enjoy having some of those in your collection to show off and display? That with some labels is a really big thing. So maybe there's some focus on some of those. If it's a label that is, something you would like to be more interested in a complete set of collecting, then that's potentially a way to go about it. I know this is something that with labels that are maybe newer or smaller, or maybe a little bit easier to find in certain things, people may want to, collect for a complete set of something like this. This can be a little difficult if you're getting into something like Kino Lorber or the Criterion Collection that have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of titles. So, again, I think it's important to keep your goals manageable. If you're wanting to say, I want all of the Criterion Collection releases in one calendar year, we're looking at around 1,300 releases at this point. That is a lot, and you may be able to do that. I'm not 100% sure. I know personally that wouldn't be something I would be able to get in my collection, but maybe it's the beginning of an ongoing goal that eventually you do want to do something larger for that. And also something like discovering a new label. I know I have episodes, the label discovery episodes, where I'm doing a little bit of this, and it's a format for me to dive into something new and, really kind of discover what this label is all about, and check out something new that you haven't seen before, and see if it's something that you want to keep in your collection, to continue to collect for, to add more to. There's a lot of ways to kind of have a goal as far as focusing on a label. And, you know, it's certainly not limited to that. I think there's a lot of ways to continue to do that as well. These collecting goals also don't have to be limited to just adding new movies to your collection. And I think there's a really, I'm going to call it healthy, but you know, I think it's a good collecting, mindset to always be aware of your own collection, what you have in your collection, and evaluate whether you have certain things in your collection that you maybe don't watch anymore or maybe won't go back to, or you have them just to have them and maybe you move on from them. So looking at evaluating and potentially even paring down the collection that you have can be a really good positive collecting goal for you. And you could think of this in certain ways, that if you have limited space, movies take up space on a shelf, hence the name of this podcast, Cinema on a Shelf. If you have a certain limited shelf space and you are getting to the point where you maybe don't have a lot of space left, then one way that you can kind of make room for new stuff is to look at what you have and maybe say, I wasn't in love with this film as much as I thought I would be, or I've watched it once and I'm not sure if I'm going to go back to it at any point. I do think it is a really, positive thing to look at that and say, well, maybe these, 5 or 10 movies I think I will move on from in one way or another to make room for new movies on my shelf and new discoveries. And that whole idea of curation, I think, really kind of goes in that idea of evaluating what you have and evaluating what you want to add to go with it. So, there's a lot of different ways that if you do pare down your collection, that you can move on from them, whether it's selling or reselling anything. This could be locally on somewhere like Facebook Marketplace, or putting them onto eBay. I know a lot of people will do that to, again, get a little bit of money to reinvest in their collection, which I think is a very smart way to build a collection. There are also places that are physical media stores, whether it's video game store or other physical media kind of specific retailers that will take movies on trade-in. And maybe they're buying movies as well. They might give you some money, but a lot of times with these places, if they do take trade-ins, they will often give you trade-in credit that is very likely worth a little bit more than what they would give you in cash. And again, you can use that trade-in credit to look at purchasing more things for your collection with your other goals and your new focuses for that year. So there's potentially that. You can also, look at the movies you have and pass them along to friends, or pass them along to other fellow cinephiles that you've met, of saying, hey, I didn't like this movie as much, but I know you really do, so I'm going to, re-gift it or rehome it to this person. And that's a really fulfilling way to do it too. Even trading with friends, of saying, hey, I have this, would you be interested in doing some sort of a trade? And maybe they have some movies that they'd like to move on from that, you can both benefit from doing a little swap after that. And, if you do have a whole bunch of movies, if you're, let's say, getting rid of a huge bulk of movies, of DVDs, of maybe things that you've upgraded and you have doubles of, and you want to, give them as donations to thrift stores, Goodwills, whatever you have, then that's also another way that you can sort of look at, if you're paring down a collection, ways to do it. And again, it's also good to support local thrift stores. A lot of them are supporting local charities. It is a really nice way to do that as well. And if you're someone that does go looking in the thrift stores for new movies for your collection, then having a few that you take in as donations keeps that cycle of discovery and thrifting going in terms of the physical media collecting space. There are some other more intangible aspects of collecting that you may also want to set for yourself as a goal. And I mentioned, shelving and storage and having a certain amount of space. Perhaps, you're looking and evaluating your own shelves and your own storage, and maybe you have some space and you do want to upgrade or increase the amount of shelves and storage that you have. Maybe you have some shelves that you're not tremendously happy with and you want to upgrade them for better quality. So a lot of ways to look at your own shelving and say, well, I think I'd be more interested in this, or maybe there's some options for shelves that would take up the same amount of space but maybe will hold more movies. That's something that you can again maximize your own space for. So that's I think a really interesting goal as well, and something that is usually something that you focus on like one big thing. I know a lot of people say, I'm going to redo my whole shelving area with this. It's something that you can do in smaller increments as well. It doesn't have to be a big, huge project. So maybe your shelving and your storage situation is something that you evaluate and put in as a goal for the year. I mentioned about evaluating and paring down your collection. You may also decide to set a goal for yourself of buying less. If you had a year where maybe you spent a lot of money on collecting and you maybe have a huge backlog of movies, or you just, are really happy with what you have in your collection, then maybe your goal is to not spend as much money that year, which I'm a collector. I know that sounds very counterintuitive, but it is something that you can set for yourself as a goal. And I think, there will always come a time in people's collection where, they're quite happy with what they have and maybe slowing down and only just getting, a few things at a time at a rate that was less so than what they were collecting before. That's something that a lot of people might be really interested in doing. It is also something that is really good if you are in a point where your financial situation changes. Maybe you have different work situation, maybe you've moved to a different city and you're paying more for rent or other amenities, or you've got other things going on. You've bought a house, you bought a new car, you have different expenses that are, your budget is going to be going somewhere else. So maybe buying less is part of your collecting goal in getting to where you want for some of these other areas of your life. You may also decide that purchasing from different places and different sources is something that you'd be more intentional about. Different people will have, different thoughts of where they want their money to go. I know personally, I really like to, support local stores, support different areas that are near me that are selling physical media. And, if they're doing a really good job, then I do want to support them and make sure they can continue to stay in business. So for me, that's something that, if I am getting into a habit of purchasing a lot from an online retailer, a big box store, that maybe I want to change how I'm spending my money to have it go somewhere a little more local, or maybe somewhere even that isn't local, but maybe I enjoy the curation of more, maybe something more of a specific physical media store or Blu-ray store rather than, something that's a bigger box store. Everybody has their own kind of desires of how they want to spend their money, and thinking about where that's going and what it's supporting is something that a lot of people get really into. So even discovering new sources, that maybe there are some untapped resources online or maybe in your own hometown. Like I said, I've discovered in 2025 that there was a boutique physical media store in my city that I had not ever been to, and now I've been several times. And keeping, being open to looking for new places to find movies and discover movies, I think is a really good goal to have as well. Another fun intangible goal that I am starting to get a little bit more interested in, and actually this year I'm setting a goal for myself within this, is watching or collecting challenges. So this kind of came about in looking at my own Letterboxd account, some of the people that I follow on Letterboxd, and I saw right in the first couple of days of 2026, somebody had logged a movie from the Criterion Collection, and in the tags for their review had put Criterion Challenge 2026, and in their review had given the category in which the movie they watched was going to fit. And I did a little bit of research and found that this is a thing that has been going on for a number of years, the Criterion Challenge for specific years. And it is 52 different categories of movies that you can watch. And basically the goal is to watch 52 movies throughout the year that will fit into each of these categories. And, I just finished up my first year having a Letterboxd account, which I've really enjoyed and I'm going to continue with this year. And this was just really fun because I thought, I really enjoy collecting Criterion stuff. And I think this would be a neat way to go back and rewatch some stuff in my own collection and maybe think about new films that I want to add, or maybe stuff that's about to come out that would fit into one of those categories. Thought it was a really interesting sort of challenge. So this is something I'm doing on Letterboxd. If you're interested in following me, my Letterboxd is at Maddie236, and I am going to be putting tags in my reviews that will fit into the Criterion Challenge 2026. Search up the Criterion Challenge 2026 on Google. There is a user on Letterboxd that has everything spelled out, and if you want to follow along, I think this is really fun. I haven't really done something like this before, so I think this sort of watch along challenge can be really fun. I'm sure there are a lot of them out there. This is the one that I've sort of chosen to take part in 2026 because it does fit into my own collecting habits, my own movie watching habits. So if that sounds interesting to you, have a search. If you're a Letterboxd user or on Reddit or on Google, there's a lot of different places with these interesting watch along challenge. And it's a good way to engage with the community online, or even if you did this with a group of friends. Let's say, hey, we're going to get together once a month and watch a specific kind of movie, or have it where your friends pick the movie. That's a really fun watching challenge that you could do in person as well. So again, it's something that is a little bit outside of collecting, but it is something that I thought was really fun and something I wanted to take part in 2026. I'm going to use that as a nice little segue into the final bit of the episode today, which is where I want to talk a little bit about some of my own collecting goals that I am thinking about for the year 2026. So there's a lot of different types of goals that you can set for yourself, but I did want to round this out with a few that I'm focusing on myself personally, just to sort of show a little bit of what this can look like for you. And this is by no means me saying that, hey, everybody should be doing these type of goals, and this is really personal for me, just as I think any collecting goals should be personal for you specifically. And maybe it fits in with a bigger goal that a lot of other people are doing, like the Criterion Challenge in 2026. But these are some of the things that I'm sort of thinking of and focusing on for my own collecting habits this year. The very first one that I have is one that I have tried to put a little bit of focus on at the end of 2025, and I'm definitely going to be thinking about in the early part of this year. And it's more of an intangible collecting goal, and that is just allowing myself some time to watch what I already have. And I laugh because this is, I think anybody that collects anything, whether it's video games or records or movies, you have certain things that you want to purchase and put in the collection, but maybe you want to watch before they officially go on a shelf. I'll give you a little bit of insight into my brain. This is kind of how I think about these things. If I buy a new record, even if it's an album I've heard before, I do sort of want to clean the record and listen to it all the way through on my turntable before I put it in my full-on record collection shelf. And I don't always give myself enough time to listen to all the records I want or play all the video games that I get. And in this case, I want to give myself some time to watch the movies that are in my backlog, that I have physical copies for in my collection. But I want, I have a lot. I did pretty well as far as collecting in 2025. And I want to give myself some time, especially in the first probably quarter of the year, to watch as many of these as I can and really kind of get into the mode of not just, collecting to collect, and also getting back into what I like to do, which is to collect movies and to watch movies in about the same amount in either one. So I'm not, getting this huge pile of movies that I want to watch, which is currently what I have. So one of my goals for 2026 is to allow myself that time to watch some of what I already have. A couple of episodes ago, I was talking about the Warner Archive collection and did that as a label spotlight. They're a label that I really quite enjoy. I'm a big old movie fan, and the Warner Archive has the largest collection of older classic Hollywood films anywhere, and they are releasing some wonderful releases, whether they're on 4K or Blu-ray. And because, as I mentioned in that episode, of the recent news with Warner Brothers going through the ownership change and it looking like Netflix is going to be the winner of the open bidding for purchasing Warner Brothers, again, and I still think the same thing in the episode. I don't think it's necessarily cause for like alarm bells to panic buy everything you can possibly get from Warner Brothers, but it made me go into the Warner Archive collection, especially the Blu-rays that are available, and came up with kind of a list of stuff that I really would like to have in my collection from Warner Archive. And 2026, I do want to put a little bit of priority on adding that movies in that list to my collection. Now, some of them are going to be upgrades, films that I have on DVD that I want to upgrade to Blu-ray. And again, it remains to be seen what is going to be happening with physical media, with Warner Brothers, with this whole new thing. I don't really know, and I'm not 100% sold on the fact that it's going to be awful. I'm not 100% sold that it's going to be great. We're in the middle. We really don't know at this point, but they have so many wonderful films, and because it's an area of film that I love, and I just would like to kind of take this list that I've made and put some priority on adding those to my collection this year. Don't know that I'll get all the way through the list, but I do think it's something that I want to keep an eye on throughout the next 12 months for sure. Another goal that I have kind of goes in with some of the episode types that I have been doing with this podcast, and that's the label discovery episodes. And I have a number of releases from certain labels that I am going to be using as label discoveries. I know we've got one coming up in a couple of episodes that is a very popular one at this point, and I'm really looking forward to that. But I do also want to do a little bit of research and add some new titles from a boutique label that I don't currently own anything from. And I do have a little bit of a list that of boutique labels that I don't own anything from, that I want to do a little bit of research to look at what they have in their collections to see where some of my interests might overlap, to purchase some of those and to get a chance to watch them and see if that boutique label is for me and something I want to keep in my collection and continue to collect. Also, a full disclosure, to be able to make an episode for the podcast about it. It's been really fun to do those ones that I've done so far with Vinegar Syndrome and with Indicator Films. I really enjoyed that episode in 2025 and want to, be able to continue to do that, not only with some of the releases that I already have purchased for that reason, but to kind of look specifically maybe at one brand new label this year that I don't have anything from and decide where I want to dive into them. I mentioned a little bit about looking at your own storage and shelving. For my collection last year, before we get started 2025, I had these two shelves that are old IKEA shelves that I got secondhand on Facebook Marketplace many, many years ago when I was kind of beefing up what I had for storage. And they've served me well. They are a little bit bulky for the space that I'm in, and I wanted to get something that would go a little bit more flat to the wall in where I am, and did find a shelf that I was really quite happy with, and so I bought one of them and replaced one of the older, bigger IKEA shelves with it. I do want to continue to improve my shelving, and probably the next step in that in 2026 is going to be purchasing a second version of the new one that I got in 2025 to replace the other IKEA shelf, which is still part of it. And they're kind of mismatched. It would be nice to have kind of the similar shelves looking side by side aesthetically to look really good. They do hold a little bit more stuff on the shelf as well, so might help give me a little bit more space with that. But I think in 2026, that's also something that I want to look at improving. That's a little bit more intangible than just buying more movies. I do have one, what I'm calling stretch goal, which is more of a, if I get an opportunity to dive into this, I think I would really like to. And that stretch goal is to go region free. So I've mentioned in other episodes about region free players and how DVDs and Blu-rays specifically are kind of mostly locked by regions and how they're numbered and lettered and all those different things. I don't currently own a player that is fully region free. I do have my 4K player on my gaming console that, 4Ks are natively region free, so I could play, movies on 4K from anywhere in the world on it, at least for the most part, I believe you can. But I think this year, if I find myself in a position, and look at some of the finances that go with it, I would like to get myself a region-free player, and as part of that, then start to look at what is out there in different regions for films. And specifically, I know in looking at, there's some films that I really love from places like the UK and France and Germany and other parts of the world that are just not as readily available in North America, or we're waiting for a North American distributor to pick up rights or maybe do a restoration or something like that. And those do take time, obviously. A lot of companies have large slates of movies that they're doing with this, and they can't always get all of those type of movies in there. So this is one I'm not 100% sure if it will happen in 2026, but I'm putting it as my stretch goal to sort of say, hey, I would really like to get a region-free player and get more into collecting some region-free stuff. There's some financial stuff that goes with that, obviously. Region, if you're importing Blu-rays, 4Ks, there's extra cost that goes with that, and I understand that. So this is my stretch goal. If it works out, I'm very, very interested to get into that aspect of collecting, because there is a lot of great movies that I absolutely love that are kind of hard to find at this point in time. So be nice to have that as a new wrinkle to my own collecting habits. There are also a couple of previous collecting goals that I've had over the last year or two that I do want to continue forward with. One I've mentioned in a previous episode in Collecting My Way. I have been on the hunt the last few years to try and own physical copy of everything that exists for films directed by Billy Wilder, who is one of my favorite directors of all time. Has an incredibly varied career, going from the 1930s in Weimar Germany, to him immigrating to the United States and writing and then eventually directing a lot of Hollywood films. Some of the most well-known films of all time: Sunset Boulevard, Some Like It Hot, Double Indemnity. He also has just a wonderful collection of comedies, dramas, film noir, biographies, a little bit of everything. And the last couple of years, I have been able to acquire quite a few films from his collection, and I would like to continue to do that, because the more I watch of him, the more I love his stuff, how varied he was, what a great writer he was. He's probably the greatest screenwriter of all time, and everything I have seen of his, even if it is kind of not exactly my thing, or kind of is just fine, there's always something about all of his movies to love that I really latch onto. So I am going to continue this collecting goal that I've had for the last couple of years, and looking for which of his films are available and what versions that I want to be looking for them. If there's any upgrades, some of them I won't necessarily upgrade. I know the Arrow Video is about to release a 4K of The Apartment, which is one of my favorite films of all time, Billy Wilder or otherwise. And I actually own the Blu-ray of the Arrow Academy version of The Apartment. So I probably won't upgrade that one, just because I do really like the edition that I have. And, it's the limited edition with the big book that goes with it. So don't know they'll upgrade that necessarily, but maybe there's more to come from Billy Wilder stuff this year. So we will see. The other collecting goal that I want to continue this year, I've saved for the very end because it's actually going to be a little segue into the next episode, which is going to be a label spotlight episode. So last year, I made a discovery for a label, which is a Vinegar Syndrome partner label that I absolutely love. It was my favorite boutique label to collect for in 2025. It's not a large library in this label. I think at this point they have under 40 releases. They are still releasing new stuff throughout the year, as most of the Vinegar Syndrome partnered labels do. But I have a connection to this one because it involves Canada, where I live. And when I was in university, I took an English-Canadian film class, and I kind of fell in love with so many Canadian films that are often not very widely seen in, well, anywhere in the world, but even in my own country. So this label is Canadian International Pictures, and I've been on a really fun collecting journey through 2025 with them. It's going to continue into 2026, and I don't want to talk too much about it because that is going to be the focus of the next episode of Cinema on a Shelf. So the next time you hear from me, we are going to do a label spotlight on Canadian International Pictures. Thank you very much to everyone for listening to the podcast today. Hope you are having a good new year, and hope you're thinking about setting some collecting goals for yourself. I would love to hear about some of those goals and have some conversations and back and forth about it. There's a few different ways that you can do that. If you want to follow me on social media, I have an Instagram at Cinema on a Shelf. I also post all of these episodes to YouTube, and there are YouTube comments that I reply to on each of these videos and episodes. And I also do a podcast with my wife called I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen, where we go back and forth and watch movies that one or the other person hasn't seen, and they direct the conversation. So if you love movie podcasts and that sounds like an interesting one, definitely check that out. It is I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen. We also have an Instagram at I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen. And if you're a Letterboxd user and want to follow me there, I am at Maddie236 on Letterboxd. Happy New Year again to everyone. Happy collecting in 2026. We'll see you in the next episode.